right, primitive screwheads, listen up. It is me again, and I am back after a very long hiatus. However, it was a very productive hiatus, so I'm happy to report on that. Lately, things have started to calm down a little bit for me because, again, I have been very busy, so I haven't been posting much by way of podcast or videos especially, because those things take time, privacy, and silence. 3 things that I don't get a whole lot of nowadays. But you do what you can with what you have. And things have, like I mentioned, somewhat calmed down, and I've been wanting to get back into this. I've been getting a lot more involved in the communities and various activities that I'm into, which is actually going to be the subject of this particular podcast. As mentioned by the title, I'm going to cover the 2 things that I am most into in this world as far as activities, occupations even, which is magic and magic. There is a relationship between these things. Magic spelled with a C and magic spelled with a CK. The reason behind this difference in the spelling was set up mostly by the practitioners of occult magic to differentiate what they do between what stage magicians do. And while I understand the desire to make the differentiation happen, I actually think it's unnecessary because these things are quite a bit more related than they are not related. And as somebody who does both, I'd like to see if I can clear some of that up by going into a little bit of my own explorations into this subject. I want to start with the performance side of magic. If you know me, you know I am actually a professional performance artist. Specifically, I am a mentalist and bizarre magician. I got into that because a friend of mine a very, very long time ago, I think I was in junior high school at the time, he showed me a card trick. And the card trick involved a little bit of sleight of hand to do. Then he showed me how he did it and taught me the little bit of sleight. And I picked up on it very quickly. I started looking into other things, different types of sleight of hand, and I didn't get into magic because I liked it, because I actually didn't. I got into it because I found out I was good at it. And I wasn't good at much, especially back in junior high school and high school, arguably still to this day. But I was able to do it pretty well, and I still to this day, there's a coin move called a retention vanish, and I'll put my retention vanish up against just about anybody's in the world. Which is ironic because I never do one in like any of the pieces in any of my shows. Something I've always wanted to fix, but just opportunity never really came up. Or not often anyway. But I didn't like it. I didn't want to get into it. And it wasn't because I didn't like magic. It was because, and I found this out actually much later, I really didn't like the accepted way of presenting magic. By that, what I mean is when I was a kid, and in the town I grew up in didn't have a magic shop. It didn't have, supplies. We didn't have the internet back then because, I'm old. So I was pretty much relying on the public library and this one little section of a toy store that had, novelties and a couple of magic items. So to me, magic was Doug Henning, David Copperfield, Penn and Teller, and then a bunch of people wearing sequin tuxedos. And that was pretty much it. That's all I knew about the subject. I was no David Copperfield. I was no Doug Henning. I wasn't really into Penn and Teller because I didn't like the whole explaining magic stuff, especially what they did in their early days. You can argue that they kind of don't do that, especially now, but in their early days, we're talking like the early 90s, late 80s, when they were first starting to become noticed, yeah, they kind of really did. And I Yeah, something about that always sat unwell with me. So I couldn't get into the popular stuff, and I despised the sequined tuxedo wearing jackasses that all basically did all the same stuff. So I didn't really dive into it much. I used it to basically, meet girls. It works. Ask my wife. It was ironic then that I picked up my first real book on magic. I don't mean the stuff that you can check out in the library that shows all the basics, all the beginner stuff. I found something that was like really, really real, really, really expensive, especially for the time. And I bought it in a book called Paramiracles by Ted Leslie, who's still one of my inspirations, one of my mentors that I've never met. And it was a book specifically on mentalism. Now suddenly this whole nother world came about. People that were doing things seriously. Not serious as in like somber, but seriously as in they actually took what they did seriously. They presented it seriously, not as Shecky the Sequin jackass, but as somebody who was wielding some kind of real power. This was eye-opening to me. And it was also right about the same time that I got out of magic completely for about a decade. I just basically put it all up because I went off and did other stuff with my life at the time that magic, there was just frankly no room for it. I picked things back up living in Chicago when I was there, and I dusted off the Paramiracles book, I read it again, and I started reading into these guys called the Bizarrists who were presenting magic, not just like in mind-reading stuff, like as in mentalism, but they were actually presenting magic as real, as serious, with story, with meaning behind why they were doing what they were doing. And this really attracted me. And that is what I dove into. I dove into it head first. All the while, even though this is going on, I am also a practicing occultist, deeply involved in the paranormal, the preternatural, and I actually got into that first. I was interested in stuff like that before I was even shown that first card trick. Now, this is a strange relationship because I'm not a Wiccan. I'm not into that kind of a path. To me, it's just, if I had to describe myself when it comes to the esoteric side of what I do, I describe myself as a sorcerer. Simply because I just like to collect the stuff that works and that is interesting and that I can practice without being on any kind of specific path. Now, the middle of the road is the most dangerous place to stand. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to signal out, hey, look at me, I'm allies to both people. Because it really doesn't work that way. Whether you're talking politics or ideologies or this, you don't want to be middle of the road because I don't have allies on both sides as much as I have enemies on both sides. The magic community, as in the performance magic community, for the most part, the vast majority of them have no interest or room in their lives whatsoever for the esoteric or occult community. Many of them are so adamant about that they're known as being strict debunkers. For a while there, I was a part of that crowd also. But for reasons that might be good for another video or another podcast, I broke away from that pretty quickly. On the occult side, however, they're the ones that came up with the idea of spelling magic with a CK, because they didn't want to be associated with the performance side. And when I tell them that's what I do, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them kind of dismiss me as not being real enough. That I'm the joke. But then again, a lot of that is they kind of, as soon as you tell somebody that you're into magic and you do magic for a living, they automatically kind of picture you as Shecky the sequined jackass, doing card tricks and doves and all that stuff. And those stupid linking rings. Yeah, I said it. Another podcast for another time. I hate those stupid linking rings. But the truth is, I believe both of these things are directly related to each other. Here's the reason why. On the performance side, their history comes from the occult. Context is the most valuable thing that you get out of history. Study it, understand it, appreciate it, hold it in respect and reverence. Because all of the things you do, all the sleight of hand, all the making something disappear from one hand and reappearing in the other, these have its roots in the occult practice. Because occult magic, much of it involved that, and the people who practice occult magic need to fess up to this reality. Healing, for example. If you know occultists, witches, white witches, wizards, whatever it is that you get to know, when you get to know them, healing is one of the arts in the occult. And a major school in healing is not that the practitioner is healing a customer or client or target. What they're doing is they're promoting the client, target, customer, they're promoting their ability to heal themselves. You do this with deep-rooted faith. Now, I'm going to say something here very controversial, but it happens to be the truth. When you demonstrate feats that are absolutely impossible and amazing, and show people that you have the power to make blank happen, their faith in you becomes very strong. And their faith in what's happening subsequently becomes equally strong. The subjects involved in occult and esoteric type magic, they're demonstrating this to increase the amount of faith in the people that are around them, thereby promoting the power that's coming from them. This is considered something extremely unethical on the performance magic side, because it's essentially lying. You're showing somebody, I can do these amazing things, and you're not using one of these so-called disclaimers telling people that what you're doing isn't actually real. But it works. The power of positive thinking, the power of faith is clinical. I mean, there's no disputing this. Loss of hope is one of the reasons that people who find themselves in survival situations tend to not make themselves out of it. So the magician of old would use some of these techniques to instill faith in the people around them. Yes, this can be used for unethical purposes, and it, of course, has been used for that. When you're using illusion, deception, gimmicks and sleight of hand and so forth, to make people think that you are using real powers when you're not, yeah, that is essentially lying, and many people have used that ability to commit extraordinarily heinous acts of fraud. They should be called out when they're doing it like that. I'm of the mind that there is still part of people that could use some of this sometimes. When I tell people that I'm a practicing occultist, I mean exactly that. I practice ritual, ceremonial type magic. I investigate into the occult. I'm very much into mysticism and spirituality. I don't believe that everything is nonsense, that everything is sleight of hand. That's all magic. That's what you're going to find a lot on the other side of this. Consequently, if you are an occultist, if you do practice esoteric type magic, understand that many of the things that you're seeing today are really shiny, watered down versions of what was performed and practiced earlier. All magic, regardless of how you spell it or how you practice it, involves hidden knowledge. That's what occult actually means, is hidden knowledge. I know something and I can do something that you can't because I know how it's done. And we all do this in most respects of our lives. But the magician is in a very, very unique, centralized place to make all of this happen. So don't just blow it off as, well, that's the fake stuff. Yeah, it is. But your ancestors did it too. In fact, it's a good idea to learn a bit of both. I recommend any professional performing magician that I know to pick up a few books on the occult. Study up on what the principles are behind things, what the thought processes are. It'll actually help your performance. You know, the famous Max Maven once said that the bad magician, if you ask him how the vanishing handkerchief works, and he'll describe the method that he uses and all the different moves and little devices that might be involved in that. If you ask a good magician, how does the vanishing handkerchief work? They'll tell you, well, I just stuff it into my fist, and when I open my hand, it's gone. And then I'll look at my other hand, and I'll close it up and pull the handkerchief out of there. That's how it works. With a gleam and a glimmer in their eye. But a really good magician will say, well, when I stuff it into my fist, it dematerializes. And then into a different dimension, and then it will rematerialize as it travels through a different reality to my other hand, in my other hand, and then I can show it to people like that, because they understand how the magic works in their minds. So when you understand the thought processes behind how practitioners and believers in the occult work, maybe it'll actually translate into what you're actually doing on stage. Conversely, I do beg that most people who are practicing occult magic learn some of the stage stuff. You'll be better off for it, especially if, like many who are into the spiritual and the mystical type of magic, if you're into investigating the paranormal. You must know this kind of stuff if you're doing that. Look no further than to Project Alpha, 1979, I believe is the year. It's when James Randi had a few professional magicians that he brought to scientists at Washington University, which is my hometown, actually. And he told the scientists that these people, I think, are psychic. Can you test them? And the scientists tested them in every way that they could, and it came to the conclusion, yes, these people are psychic. But they weren't. They were stage magicians who were just really good, and they were good enough to deceive the so-called experts. The stage magician has the knowledge about the tools, the principles, the techniques, to discover when something isn't real, and they can call it out very, very quickly. So if you're not using that, you shouldn't be able to be taken very seriously. One of the few times that I've ever been, like, disrespected or just, flat out rejected and made fun of by anybody was actually by a very adamant paranormal investigator, somebody who was into the preternatural and the scientific study of it. And I said, I would love to start working with you if I'm in the area, and I'm a professional mentalist and magician and deeply into the occult. And as soon as I said that, one of the reactions that I got from somebody was, there's no way I'm going to let a professional magician on my team, because then people won't take us seriously because they'll think something's fraud. No, you must have somebody with this knowledge on your side, because they can find the things that you can't. It doesn't discredit what you're doing at all. It lends credibility to it. Without it, you're missing out on a tool, a very handy tool, hell, a weapon, if you even want to call it that. And to not use a weapon that's available to you willingly, it makes no sense to me. So both of these things should be explored if you're into them. You're not going to make a lot of friends, trust me on that. Well, I will say that once when I was, I think it was back in Chicago, as a matter of fact, I did a performance for a private party that was a witches' coven. and they loved it. I made a few friends there, and I've been around the communities and trying my best to get in. But I make the friends in these communities when I actually talk to the people, rather than when I just introduce myself. I found a lot of dismissive behavior on both sides of this story. My purpose of making this video, or not video, but this podcast, was, number one, I wanted to expand on what it is that I did for anybody who might be interested. And number two, if you are into these things, approach things with a little bit more of an open mind. I think you're going to benefit from it. And hopefully that will benefit you. It will benefit people like me who would like to do nothing more than help. Beyond that, I hope that you found a little bit of interest and enlightenment here in this particular podcast, and I'm glad to be back. If you have any questions, stories, want to communicate with me, I'm all over the social medias and the interwebs, so please feel free to do so. We'll call it Ask a Wizard. All right? Beyond that, good to be back, and I thank you very much for your time. All right? Grim out.